So good afternoon all. This is Ashoka. I'm the host for you, and we've been starting this new exciting webcast series. This is going to be our initiative to make you talk to us about all of your wellness issues, your mental problems that you would want to talk to someone. And we're calling this program Let's Talk. So let's talk. That is what we've been asking you to do. And we are here with our eminent panel members. This is Ashoka. I'm the CEO of Unify, and I'll be the host for today and for the time to come. And we've got three eminent panel members with us. We've got Jayanti, we've got Shivani, and we've got Sri Lakshmi ma'am. All three of us are joining us today this afternoon. I would ask you to give a brief intro of yourself and your experience with the topic that we're going to discuss today. Jayanti ma'am.
So I am Dr. Jayanti Sundarajan, and I'm a psychologist. I work at Roshni Counseling Center, and I've had about 10 years of experience in corporate counseling as well. So I deal with counseling, psychotherapy, and also assessments of children who are unable to perform at par with their grade levels, and we help the parents to understand the children. So this is, in a nutshell. There's a lot I can talk about myself, but let's begin with this.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot. Shivani ma'am.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Shivani. I'm a certified relationship and empowerment coach. And I've been through this journey where I've been intrigued by the human mind and behavior and how it really works. So I guess how wellness and how a coach, empowerment coach, is relevant in this discussion today is because not everybody needs, is clinically depressed or stressed out. However, there are lots of goals that we want to seek. And earlier we, had this large village type of setting where there were so many aunts and uncles whom you could talk to, people, your chacha or a younger uncle you could relate to. And those things are kind of depleting from our society. Can be somebody
Can
who
you all please be on mute? I request and recommend everyone who is joining to be on mute, please.
Please on your camera.
So
everyone, please go on mute. Shivani ma'am, you got to unmute yourself to talk now. Sorry for that.
So I've been on this journey, and while I've spent 12 years plus in corporate life, nurturing my team members and stuff, this is really life 2.0 for me, where I think I want to dedicate my life towards helping people towards wisdom, towards living their best life. And that's the tagline that I use, that live your best life. That's about me, and I think we will explore other areas as we go along.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Now we've got Sri Lakshmi ma'am joining on the discussion with us. Please, ma'am.
So I'm Dr. Sri Lakshmi. I'm an associate professor of psychiatry in Gandhi Hospital. So I'm in the front lines of COVID war now. And I'm also the consultant psychiatrist for Roshni Counseling Center. And we've been together running Roshni, me, Jayanti, and a lot of us for the last 10 years. And with the purpose of having all mental, help for all mental illnesses under one roof. So where does my role start is that where wellness ends and illness starts is where a psychiatrist is needed. So the thing is, it is very difficult for us to know when the wellness is ended, and it is not a temporary phase where we're going through. It is not just temporary sadness or my pet died, I'm unhappy, I got less marks, I'm unhappy. It is not depression. But it's just a temporary, shall we say, setback. And the wellness is set back for a few days or a few minutes. But when it turns into clinical depression is when you need a psychiatrist. And most people do not know when to differentiate. This is where I come in. And I think one of my passions is to make mental health so easy that it reaches the simplest of, make it so simple, the concept so simple that everybody understands, and then they can apply it to themselves. And then they themselves understand when the wellness has ended and the illness has started, and they need to come to the psychologist or to the psychiatrist. That's about myself.
Fantastic. Thank you. We at Unify, we are a campus radio network, and we had been working with about more than 150 institutions across Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and Rajasthan. we've been working with more than 1.5 lakh students at this point in time. And we've realized that as part of our interactions, we've seen that there is a lot of distress that gets into students because of their experiences and exposure, especially around the COVID-19 lockdown scenarios. So based on this experience of art and out of our interactions with students, we wanted to start something like this to not only help students, but also to set a regular rhythm in the way that the students will be able to reach out to us. So what it means is every day at the same time, 2 to 3 o'clock, they'll be able to log into a meeting or a live session that we've been created, and they'll be able to talk to one of us, trying to guide them through their questions. They can remain anonymous. They'll still be able to talk to us. They'll still be able to listen to us, addressing different problems and different concerns. So with this, I was just trying to remind a story that I was going through. It says Viktor Frankl, one of the greatest psychiatrists of the 20th century, survived the death camps of Nazi Germany. His little book, Man's Search for Meaning, is one of those life-changing books that everybody should read. Frank once told the story of a woman who called him in the middle of a night to calmly inform him she was about to commit suicide. Frank kept her on the phone and talked her through her depression, giving her reason after reason to carry on living. Finally, she promised she would not take her life, and she kept her word. When they later met, Frank asked which reason had persuaded her to live. None of them, she told. What then influenced her to go on to live? Her answer was simple. It was Frank's willingness to listen to her in the middle of the night. A world in which there are someone ready to listen to another's pain seemed to her a world in which it was worthwhile to live. So with this, I wanted to highlight the importance of someone listening to someone who needs to talk, who needs to express their distress, and who needs to come out of their discomfort that they had been going through in terms of the life challenges that they are going through. They might not be able to talk about it to anyone else, but they should be able to talk to us. And that's why we call it Let's Talk. So with that, I just wanted to, we have got 3 different personalities here and 3 eminent people who have come with a variety of experience. I would want you to give a brief understanding of the difference between a coach, a counselor, and a psychiatrist.
You start with what is your understanding of these.
Oh, please, please. So that is where I'm also trying to learn from you 3.
All right. I think we should ask Dr. Sri Lakshmi to start with the definition.
So since you put the ball in my court, I will explain the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. So when you walk in, supposing, let's equate it to physical illness, it will make it easier. Supposing you've had a fracture of the leg, okay, or you hurt yourself and an X-ray shows that you have a clean break in your thigh bone. So what would you prefer? Would you just want to go in for physiotherapy directly and then say that this is enough, I do not need any other treatment? Or would you rather fix the surgery, get it healed, and then you go for physiotherapy? Similarly, when your mind is not well and you are having a mental illness, we are not talking of temporary distress, when you're having a mental illness, the person who fixes the part which is responsible for causing the illness is a psychiatrist. That is, we're the biological doctors. I'm an MBBS MD psychiatry, like you would do an MBBS and MD in general medicine. I'm an MBBS MD in psychiatry, so I'm allowed to prescribe medication. So these are all the pitchy doctors you see in every movie which is show, and this is we are those ones who were made a parody of. So the psychologists are, though I'll ask Jayanti to continue, they are our friends and companions in the treatment of mental health. Mental health is never ever treated singly. It is a group of people who are treating it. So the psychologist takes up when the need is there for more of therapy, more of counseling, more of life issues to be dealt with, which is causing the distress. They work some people just need counseling and they end up getting better. And some people who actually have the illness needs a psychiatrist to deal with the condition, like you would do a surgery in a fracture. And they would need a psychologist to deal with the various life issues which is aggravating the condition, like a physiotherapist would do to increase the muscle strength in a fractured leg. So I thought that was the easiest explanation I could come up with.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Many a times what happens is we as psychologists, we get referrals from the psychiatrist. And there are times when the people who walk into the consultation don't want to go to the psychiatrist because they have these myths about side effects and medicines, and going to a psychiatrist means I am mad. And also we are there the therapist and the psychologist to ease their way, because we know at a first glance, we know that there is a medical requirement, but we have to ease it to them. We have to say, okay, fine, we'll try it your way. We'll give you some skills to cope with these issues. Nowadays, we are seeing that there's a 50-50 understanding and acceptance of going to the psychiatrist and to the psychologist also. So when a client comes to us, we need, as a psychologist, first we need to understand whether it is only a psychological or an adjustment issue where only counseling will help. Psychotherapy is usually used for deep-rooted conflicts, which has been going on for years, like, these negative thoughts which don't go at all, no matter what you do, how much you divert. Medicine plus psychotherapy is a very good combination, but there have been times when I have diagnosed and I've said that yes, you need medical help, you need to take medicines, but Dr. Srilakshmi has felt no, counseling is enough or therapy is enough. So it's a group work, it's a teamwork, and a lot of times our role is to work with the families.
Yeah.
If there is a schizophrenia, a psychiatrist will treat the schizophrenia, but we are there to, although the psychiatrists also have to be equipped with counseling and therapy, we can spend more time than them. So we are there to get a cooperation, get an understanding. If a person in schizophrenia is saying something, you don't need to take it literally and react and ask the person to stop thinking like that, or ask the person to stop talking like that. So all of these things, as a therapist, all of these, counseling the family and stuff. Now, wellness is something she needs to talk about.
Okay. When it comes to coaching, coaches do not treat people who are diagnosed as mentally ill. So anybody who comes and has a problem which is in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, that is not an area of coaches. Actually, if you're a certified coach, then you will go through a series of understanding what are the signs that you need to pick up. And if you do pick up those signs in somebody who has come to you for help, then we also refer them to a psychologist most of the times, and they then know whether the diagnosis needs a psychiatrist or a counselor. So that definitely is an area that coaches do not get into. However, coaches, coaching started with the whole idea of executive coaching, and then it went into leadership coaching. And what over time the federation, the ICF Federation, understood was that even when it comes to leadership coaching and individual coaching, it is all about how you see the world and how you attack your goals, how you approach them step by step. And that is an area that not only corporate people need, everybody needs them. So if you're going through something like a worry or a stress, a relationship issue, or if you're going through something where you want to feel more empowered, you're having confidence issues and you're not able to, let's say, speak in front of the public, that's where you would want to contact a coach and speak to them about it. What happens in that process is that the slight difference that again between coaching and counseling is when you come to a coach, you kind of have an idea of what you're looking for. So you would know that I am wanting to gain confidence, or I want a better career, or I want my relationship to be better. Yes, we do get into defining your goal in a bit of a practical way, which is called SMART goals, so that you are more clear about what you want, right? But most of the times we do not get into therapy. We do not talk about the past and what trauma you may have gone through. It is definitely focused towards the future. Yes, obviously, while you're talking, sometimes you will talk about something that happened and some limiting belief will come up, and then we will address that. But the goal or the focus of the coaching is towards what next. What is it that you want to do, and how you can go about doing that, and how you have to let go of some thoughts, some beliefs which may be holding you back. So.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Now, with the given scenarios of what we are going through, especially with students after the COVID-19 lockdown, and after students are not really given that freedom to go out and talk to their peers and friends that they usually do, and their class, they might be missing their classroom environment. Now, what I wanted to ask you is, what sort of trends have you started seeing from a distress perspective? Have you started seeing anything interesting, and have you had to take more load these days than what it was earlier? Let's start with Jayanti ma'am.
Can you repeat the question?
I'm saying after after COVID-19, the
Yes,
corona effect, have you seen any trend that is more particular towards the current scenarios?
Yes. There is an increase in the seeking help process. Probably because everybody is at home. If you take a child scenario or a teenager scenario, the mothers are the ones who are detecting there is some problem, and the fathers don't have the time when they are working at their workplace. Now, when they are at home, they are seeing what the mother is saying is actually right. There is a problem with their teenager, and then they need to. So, in such understanding of being at home and really living in the situation and seeing how one parent is struggling with the child, that's one. The second help seeking has come from students who are not going to colleges. They are staying at home. They are talking to their friends. They are all the time online now, and they are expressing, because rest of the stress is fallen off now. Education, and there's no going to college. There's no pressure of submitting this thing. So their deep-rooted fears and all are coming to friends. And if one of their friends have attended counseling or therapy or taken psychiatric help, sometimes are encouraging their friends, just go and talk and see how it works.
Mm-hmm.
So that is happening. So this situation, COVID situation, although it is a crisis, but there are other issues which are getting resolved now.
So you mean to say that people are becoming more aware of their needs to talk to someone about what
they are introspecting, right? Because they have a lot of time on their hands now. So they're thinking, they are, in fact, there are people who are calling and asking, like, I don't know whether this is a problem or not. You need to tell me whether this is a problem or not.
Okay.
So we are more happy to tell them if it is not a problem and it's a very minor thing. It's something which could, just by, just saying that, no, this is fine. You're okay. You're normal. They're happy and they really become normal after that. I would like to share one example of this. There was one lady at the beginning of the COVID had come. She was a recent widow. She came for one session. She was a recent widow and she was not able to cry because she had a very abusive relationship with the husband. And everybody else was like trying to put her into one kind of a, personality that you are not even sad that he died and all that. And she was getting this tremendous headaches. No amount of taking Crocin or anything, it was not helping. So she came because somebody at her workplace said that, see, we are all saying these things, but I think you should go and speak to a therapist who will tell you. She came, she told me 15 days back, husband died. I'm unable to cry. Then I probed a little bit. I understood that there was no grief. She was happy he died. She was happy she was relieved of the abusive relationship. And I said, it's absolutely normal. It is fine. You don't cry. You accept, let others say anything. You accept that you're fine. And that day till it has been 2 months now, she's not had a headache.
Oh, awesome. So it seems that the self awareness of what she is going through was missing because she was not able to realize, was she really need to cry or should she be feeling happy about it?
And she was not able to tell her people that I don't want to cry. I'm like out of this.
Yeah.
I'm happy. She can't tell that to the relatives and all that. So all this happened, and then there were a lot of cases after that, and I completely forgot about her. And she came back for her child, and then I remembered, oh, I've seen you before. She said, yeah. So she came back for her child after that.
Thank you, Shivani ma'am. Now, with the lockdown scenarios, what sort of relationship issues, especially around youngsters not being able to meet their loved ones, are coming up to you?
Interestingly, Ashoka, the thing is that the teenage kids and college-going kids, they are so used to talking to their friends on the phone and via calls and stuff, that was not the only element, that didn't affect them so much. What came across to me was the fact that a lot of kids came back from hostel and they started living in, with their parents. And suddenly from a scenario where they were more free, they had to then deal with, associating back as adults, as people, as kids and teenagers who had tasted what freedom is, gotten used to it, making their own decisions, and then they're back home, and not for like 15 days of a holiday where, mother's food is a good thing, but for an extended period of time. And that kind of caused kind of a rift. I've also had some situations where students have gotten into breakups with their boyfriends and girlfriends, and they've had issues where because of the lockdown, their girlfriends have been with their parents, and they feel that the breakup has happened because she got influenced by them. So these kind of issues. And while, and this is something I really want to say, because I feel some of my co-workers say that, no, this is a small thing. I don't feel it's a small thing, because when I meet my clients and I talk to them about it, we may have grown up and gone through our lives. We've gone through our hormonal changes and stages. We've gone through marriage. But when the child, the teenager, the college-going student is going through that pain, he's going through that pain, or she's going through that pain, right? The pain is real. And, we might sit judge and jury or be judgmental about it, that it's a small thing, one girlfriend, you'll get another one. I don't think that's the way psychologists, coaches, we are not trained to look at things like that. And I really feel for those people. So yeah, actually sticking to your question, Ashoka, the fact that it's not only the relationship of a boyfriend, girlfriend, or a partner that I've seen change. I've seen a lot of, and I'm talking the context of younger people right now, not, yes, lots of cases where we've heard that, marriages are becoming rocky and stuff, but I'm sticking to the younger generation. And yes, I have seen a lot of people saying that I don't know how to deal with my parents. They're on my head all the time. And, the younger sibling is not used to having the older sibling at home. He's used to having the room to himself. And so those kind of issues happen. And then helping them kind of get a perspective on things is what, makes you see things a little differently, looking at the big picture, not sticking to, not getting stressed because of something like having to stay at home for a few months should do.
All right. I mean, though a few facts that you would have stated sounds funny for the rest of us to sort of talk about, but when you actually put yourself in that person's mind, I mean, there's a lot going through. Yes. They're not used to it. Yes, they're not used to it. So when they are forced to go through it, I can understand what it might be, in what way it might be impacting them. So yes, you're absolutely right. And I can understand why they are reaching out to a coach right now. And let's move to the psychiatrist on the panel. Ma'am, what sort of psychiatric issues are you seeing as a result of COVID-19 and the post-COVID-19, especially with youngsters, with students?
Two types of trends, like Dr. Jayanti has already pointed out, where the good part is there are these patients who are already very anxious to say go to school, or to face the teachers, or to give exams, or to be their teacher will ask them to stand up in class to give an answer, and then they are getting very anxious because of that. These are the children who suffer from what we call a social phobia. They are very relieved. They don't have to go anywhere, so they are at home and everything is online. So these are a group of children who are happy. Yep. Then there are this group of children who get very suffer from claustrophobia, for instance. Let's say they are very scared of closed spaces. Now, COVID-19 situation is a literal lockdown. You need not be closed inside, but everything else is closed, and there seem to be no escape from the situation. That has evoked a lot of anxiety in people who are already suffering from a lot of anxiety disorders. Yeah. So people who have something called an illness anxiety. I have this disease, I have that disease. They will, not only children, but usually the onset is sometime around the early 20s. So people who start feeling that I have, with every sneeze, they feel that I have got the coronavirus into me. So these are the anxious calls that we get. That I got the disease, where do I go for a test? That kind of thing. So so the basic thing is people who are already prone to or already under treatment for anxiety disorders have suffered more during this lockdown, because of the unpredictability of the situation, because of the literal lockdown, and because of the uncertainty of future in every sphere, which has worsened their anxiety levels. But yes, there are a group who are happy, especially the introverted lot are very ecstatic about the situation, because finally they proved right, you need not go out to be happy. People are forced to be happy even when at home. So sort of their position is vindicated.
No.
It's like, I'm going to interrupt you. It's like one of my extroverted friend was joking with me and saying that, you introverts, I am sorry for pulling you and taking you to parties, but please stop this curse that you have given on us extroverts, because the introverts are obviously loving it. Yeah, absolutely.
No, I can understand. Now I'm forced to live at home. I'm forced to sort of work from home. I'm forced to be with my wife for 24 hours a day. So that sort of makes me sort of realize a lot of things that I was not earlier aware of and adjusted to, that I'll have to learn doing now. So yes, it's a strange world now, and it's a new norm that we're getting used to. And it is important for us to adjust to it at the earliest before we are in big trouble. So with that, I just wanted to know, how do you, what sort of symptoms do you see? I mean, I'm just wanting to go back to a very basic understanding of how do you diagnose the symptoms of a distress or the symptoms of a patient who is going towards a state of depression. So are there any symptoms that we can pick, especially to help the youngsters who are listening to us and who would want to follow us on this WebEx from now on? Now, how can we help them understand what are the early signs that they should be looking for?
Yeah, I think I should be taking up that question.
Yes, please.
So let's start with illness and having symptoms of distress. There is absolutely no difference. All of us have felt sad. All of us have felt guilty. All of us are anxious before a presentation. All of us have felt suspicious when our friends talk to each other and think, and we feel that maybe they're talking about me. So all of us have felt angry unreasonably many times. All of us have felt unreasonably happy many times. These are everyday issues, and all of us feel it. The line between when you move away from wellness to illness is, please understand this very clearly, these symptoms become persistent. That is, they stay on for a very long time. So if you're sad because you got less marks, and then that sadness stays for a few minutes or a few hours or even a few days, and then it goes away. And during this period, suppose your friend came and said, "Chal yaar, movie ke liye chalte," and you're happy going to that movie, and you're okay, sleeping okay, you're occasionally getting up feeling guilty, but more or less you're okay, you're eating okay, sometimes getting scolded by parents for feeling sad. That is not depression at all. When the depression, when depression started is when nothing makes you happy. The low marks or less marks may have been a trigger to cause this depression, but they're not the cause of the depression. And illness is now started where the sadness is continuously there. Nothing makes you happy. You're not able to sleep at night, or in children, they may sleep 18, 19 hours a day, and always on the bed. This child who used to love to talk to friends will not want to talk to them at all, would feel extremely sensitive when scolded by somebody. Like earlier, they would be a happy-go-lucky, light lily type person. But now every time the parent says that, "Oh, you've not cleaned up after yourself," or "you've not made your bed," the child starts crying and saying, "You're always criticizing me." So there is and there is a lot of intake of food. So I'm specifically mentioning this because one parent came and said, "Din bhar khata rehta hai, madam, and you're telling me he's depressed. Humne to suna tha depression mein log khate nahi hai." It's not that. In children, depression has a different manifestation. They will sleep more, they will eat more, they will put on weight, they will get extremely angry, they will feel very sensitive when they are criticized, and this is persistent. Persistent means it will last for many, many days. Usually the minimum is 2 weeks. And when they're doing this, their functionality is impaired. This is a very, very important point. What are your functions as a student, as a child of that age? Say you're 16 or 17 years old. What are your functions? You have to study as a student. You have to talk to your friends as a social person, and you have a personal life with your siblings and parents. You're not able to function in any of this. Na padhai mein dhyan hai, you're not able to study. You are not able to socialize. You're not even able to mingle with your siblings. And this is persistent at least for 2 weeks. Clinical depression has started and needs treatment.
Oh, great. I mean, this is a new perspective because we wouldn't have thought about it like this, especially parents, friends, and the peers that we are all around them. We would not have thought about this particular behavior as something to be noticed. And that brings me to a very important question. How can we, the peers and friends around these people, can help them out, can identify with these symptoms, and also sort of encourage them to reach out to the right help? Because if not, and if they do not get into the right help, they might really get into a deeper hole of depression. So what sort of a role do the friends and family need to play here?
Yeah, I think Jayanti will take up the question.
So basically, it's important to listen. It's important to not butt in between and say ये तो होता ही रहता है और ये कौन सी बड़ी बात है इस ये क्यों बता रहे हो आप रोज रोज क्यों ये बता रहे हो. If daily a child or a youth is telling their parents I'm sad, but they are appearing to be happy talking to the friends, then the parents should not feel that अरे ये खाली हमारे से बात करने के लिए ऐसे करता है. Youth feels better talking to the friends because the friends do not have expectations which parents have from them. So they are happy to share, and the children, the friends would say कि हाँ यार ये मेरे साथ होता है, let's deal with it together. I am with you. These words are what are important. I am with you. If the parents say that I am with you, I understand, let's talk about it. And if it is not helping, then we'll go and seek help. If the parents are able to say that, children will not go out and talk about it. And the worst part of the whole thing is if they don't have friends and the family is not listening, they go on to the virtual world and they text anybody who's available to listen to them. And this is how they become victims of sexual abuse, or they become victims of blackmail, or they become victims of so many other things. So it's very important for the people at home, the friends, the family, relatives, to be observant of not only a child, youth, anybody who is very, very normal, gregarious person, and there is a change in the personality. It has to be taken seriously. It should not be brushed under the carpet at all. So we have to listen, no matter how many times a person says that. These are times when it is very, very possible, highly possible that somebody might just cross that line and go over towards a mental illness. Because we are closed, we are in, we are not able to go out, we are not able to go for movies, there is no outlet of anything. And being inside the house, there are a lot of expectations like, ye chore, this one has to do, that chore, that one has to do, and then there is a lot of scolding happening. So the children feel that the parents are always scolding. Parents are shocked. One of the parents, they came to me, they were very shocked that the teenager told us, they use bad words. You know that they use a lot of bad words nowadays. Like, there is no barrier over there. What kind of bullshit parenting have you given me? You're saying you're good parents. You gave me AC, you gave me a room, you gave me a table, you gave me a bed. Is that what is parenting? Is what the kid has asked. You never listen to what I'm saying. When I say I am sad, because the child had to resort to cutting hands to show that he or she is depressed.
My goodness.
May I just add to what Dr. Jayanti has said? What you should not tell a child who's depressed or distressed when they come to you. It's all in your mind, you get better. Think positive, it will get better. Aap thoda exercise kar lo. You're being very lazy, you're lying on the bed all the time. You run. Every day you get up in the morning and jog, you're going to get better. Why are you not eating at all? You eat better, you'll get better. Okay? It is like telling a person with asthma that aap अच्छे से breathe karo, you will get better. You understand? It is not in their hands at all. It is not in their hands at all. You cannot advise, you cannot force a person to think better. Their mind is not giving them good thoughts. So you cannot tell them get better. It's all in your mind. So what are you doing? You're putting the onus or the responsibility of the situation back on the child. And the child now says, oh my God, everybody is saying I should get better. I am responsible for the situation. I am doing it to myself. What happens to the child? The depression gets worse instead of getting better.
That is what happens, yes.
No, this is...
And telling the child that, child or a youth or an adult, whoever it is, telling that, हमारे दिन में हमने क्या देखा था, हमने क्यों street light के नीचे पड़ा था, no, it doesn't work. आपको किस बात का depression है पूछते हैं?
Yeah, one of the children replied to that comment, street light के नीचे पड़ा था कि आप दिन में क्यों नहीं पढ़ते थे?
That's a good one.
Yeah, why the street light thing? But I would just like to add one small thing to this, that, yes, these are the symptoms of depression and this is what the role other people can play. But honestly, kids, there is one role that you yourself can play to prevent yourself to reach that kind of a situation where you're not able to eat, or you're eating too much, or not able to sleep, or sleeping too much, all of which are extreme behaviors which indicate some kind of a depression. What you can do is start to do small things. So there are lots of tools that you can use. In our coaching, we use the gratitude journal. We use the awe-inspiring walk. It is those small things which may actually, when I describe them to you, you might actually say, इसमें क्या है? You're going to take a walk. You notice how your feet are touching the ground. You notice the beautiful trees. What's so great in that? But you do that. You actually have to do it to experience. And that's the beauty of these small tools. Just by writing a gratitude journal, let's say once a week, where you put down things which you have. We forget, and I actually made my son do this at one point in time, and he made a list of stuff. And then he realized, yeah, I have my father, I have my mother, things that we don't even think. I have all my 4 grandparents alive and healthy and able to do things. So when you start writing these things down, I'm able to sleep in the afternoon, wow, a Sunday afternoon nap. Not everybody is able to do that. People have to slog in the sun. So when you start counting your blessings, these are small things, and there are a lot of other tools that you can use. There's a kindness matrix that you can make for yourself. And it's scientifically proven that actually when you're kind to others, when you share things, those things actually cause happiness much more than if you have 200 rupees, 500 rupees, 1,000 rupees to spend on yourself. And this is researched in psychological labs, and they've done this research. And I'm sure
but you are saying that, I am saying that. How many parents are saying that?
absolutely.
What they are saying is kuch karo.
Yes.
कुछ क्या करो, ऐसे मत सोचो, ऐसे मत सोचो, कैसे सोचो फिर?
It is also about those free advices that we give, saying that it is all in your mind. I mean, I feel more guilty now after listening to you all, because I would have given this advice to my brothers and sisters, my cousins, when I was growing up, and when I've treated myself as the know-all person in the world, where I would have told them that yoga karo, you'll feel better. Or think positively and you'll feel better, or go for a jog and you'll feel better. I'm feeling absolutely sorry about what I've done.
No, Ashoka, I mean, see, what I think what they're talking about also is that when you see somebody who's actually depressed, that person, if you push them to do something like that, it doesn't work. But if you see somebody who's sad, and you tell them, and if they do follow your advice and they do exercise, listen, when you exercise, there are hormones, happy hormones, like endorphins that come in your body, which actually make you happy, feel happy. What are emotions? They are biological also, right? So exercise, yoga, a walk outside, a gratitude journal, a thing of kindness that you decide to do, one kindness act every day of the 7 weeks, or 5 days a week. These things help, but they help you when you're not clinically depressed. I guess when you are clinically depressed, you need to seek a psychiatrist, and you need a psychologist who can help you via therapy, or sometimes, as ma'am will tell you, SSRIs, which are sometimes prescribed. So
let me, that's a very good point. Yeah, it's a very good point. Let me just add to clear the confusion. What she said was very right. We are talking of 2 different categories of people. People who have an illness and not really well and unable to cope anymore. So if to these people, if you say, well, you think positive, it is not going to help. There are these people who have had a temporary setback and you want to make them feel better. So here to this group, what you're doing, that mental health has just gone down a little, you're going to enhance the well-being. So with all that our wellness coaches told you, all these things work wonderfully. Let us not belittle all of them. They are the things to go to when you're feeling down. But I've just described depression to you. But when the child has already gone into that stage, the child is not able to cope, right? Ek toote hue tang par you cannot run a race. Okay, you cannot ask a child to come first in a race with a broken leg. Similarly, if the clinical depression has started, you cannot force the child to think positive, do yoga, you will get better. Medication start karo, then you do the yoga, then you do the counseling, then you do the diet, then you do all these things will add up, and together the child is going to get better very soon.
Right. I just want to understand from you experts on how conducive the environment is for the current generation to reach out to someone like you, or to even understand that they'll need help. So do you think we are well prepared? We have given enough resources for them to feel that they can reach out to someone like us or someone like you? How conducive is the environment today?
So there are some parents who are like very understanding, and they do understand that this has gone beyond them and they seek help, and they have no shame in seeking help. But there are some parents who will come with a very huge list of, complaints about the kid. a very huge list. This is what he does, or this is what he doesn't do, blah, blah, doesn't fold the bed sheets, doesn't keep this, that. There are many a times during the first consultation itself, we realize that it is the parents who need the help and not the kid. It's a parent, even youth, or even a fresh graduate also, when they come and they say that he was very good at college, but now he's not wanting to go to work and all. There is something very, very wrong in the environment of the person, which needs to be changed. So we say that, okay, the child is there. Let's first work on this. The way you're communicating with your child, the way you are. There are parents, there are fathers who are very, very authoritative. There are mothers who are very, very perfectionistic. And they think this is how they should, help their child to become something in life. The environment is very important. We play a very big role in counseling the parents to understand their own child. And we sometimes also go to the extent of talking to schools, talking to colleges.
Yes.
Like this, her kindness journals and all of those things are very good. It comes as a part of mindfulness. So we do mindfulness therapies when with certain 3-4 months of medication, when the person is ready to do that and understands the value of these things. But yes, it's very important to do these things, like, building up small exercises, self-esteem. We train the parents also to help the kid. Sometimes the parents are the co-coaches for us. So yeah, environment is very important.
Yeah.
I do think that schools have a very, very important role to play. And today, I think a lot of schools are alive to the fact that they should have in-house counselors and stuff. And there is still, I think, one hurdle, though, that if you look at it, it's the parent who comes, if the parent is coming to the counselor or the coach or whatever to sort out some issue, it's the parent who is paying the money. And then when you turn around and tell the parent something, or you are trying to tell them that, the environment needs to be conducive, it sometimes does get into a situation where they're like, we came to you to fix our son, and you're telling us, so that kind of gets into a bit of a conflict over there. Yeah. And secondly, there is also this whole thing of people are open to it, yes, but at the same time, there is, some amount of barrier that sometimes come across, especially if they've come with a certain mindset and then you're kind of, changing them. And to bring to notice the conflict factor between parents and children today, what is happening is that you've got a world that the child is exposed to. You've got media. Today, you're not exposed to only your village, your city, or your town. You're exposed to the world. Your child who's tech savvy is looking at all that is available, all the options he has. Let's say, even if we stick to career and talk about that, he's looking at, you can be a neurobiologist, or he can be an environmental scientist, and they are researching that. Whereas the parents are not there yet, and they don't understand those things. So they are stuck in this, beta engineering kar lo, or medical kar lo, MBA kar lo, those are the hot areas, medical, computer engineer ban jao, those kind of things. And that child wants to do psychology or law, get into corporate law or something, even more niche, microbiology for that matter, because he or she has seen that those are the kind of things that somebody can do and move out of India, or there is scope for there in the world, because the world is a stage for the children nowadays. So that's where, that generation gap, and what we talk about, the typical generation gap, it works like this in today's times.
You have touched upon a beautiful point, because I myself am an example of career distress, where I had to take up engineering and then an MBA, and considered as one of the handsomely earning folks in Australia. I was earning really well, and then I had to rethink on what I was doing because I was not happy, and I had to go through a career U-turn, and I had to travel back to India and then start up a company, because I wanted to give that one thing that students can look forward for to shape up a different career. And in fact, while they are going to colleges, when we are setting up campus radios in every campus, when we have associated with 150 plus campuses now, we are giving them the opportunity to be someone else, to bring forward their own talents and be beyond or work beyond their usual engineering degrees. And there are many students on this particular call itself who would watch for what they're actually going through by being part of their campus radios. So, and one of the initiatives that we have taken up is the Let's Talk initiative, where we are trying to make them talk to everyone, make them talk to the most relevant people and understand what they're going through, because it is important for them to understand what is happening to them. If they are missing upon that, if they do not understand what they're going through, and if they cannot come out of what has been pressurizing them, we'll lose many young hearts and souls to the destiny of time. And we do not want that to happen. I mean, we've already been seeing a lot happening around us. We've already been losing a lot of people who are very valuable to us. And we do not want to lose one more person to this. And that is why
your platform is very good to reach out to children. You know,
yes.
These are the minds that need to be influenced. And it's really appreciable that you're reaching out to the correct age group. You know,
Yes.
because many times it so happens that children are very open to coming for counseling or because maybe of the exposure to media and the Western media as well, where it is a cool thing to go to a psychologist or to a psychiatrist. It's not a taboo. But in our country, it's a terrible stigma. So I'll give you two examples. There is one guy who at 10 years ago, who had come when he was 16 and said, of course, with parental approval, he had come. And then he said, I have a girlfriend, I broke up with her. So immediate reaction, well, possibly he was expecting to be reprimanded. How can you have a girlfriend at 16? So I was very cool about it. Kya hua, bolo, theek hai, and all that. And then after he finished the whole session, he came and said, "You're much better than the old man I went to earlier. He scolded me for having a girlfriend. At least you're listening." So this is the change in our children. This is the change in our children. There are children who have come up to me and said, when they are able to convince their parents that they have a problem, and say that I have inattention, I've not been able to pay attention in my entire life, I tend to drift away, I cannot focus. My parents have never taken me for treatment, but now I'm old enough to force them. And it turned out that the child actually had attention difficulties, where it was treated and got much better and now doing very well in life. There are also these parents who come to us with the pressure of the child. Then they send the child out of the room and quietly they ask me, acting to nahi kar raha na? Just because he wants to get out of studies. You know, so stigma is more in our generation, the parents' generation. Once the children now, when we are reaching out to so many and making them aware of the mental illness and the role of mental wellness, this generation becomes parents, the stigma will reduce to considerable extent in our society.
That is so true. I mean, while we were talking about the institutions and the teachers also playing a role in shaping this up, I was so worried and I was so perplexed when I went to a few campuses as part of our initiative and seen that there are actually people put up on the campus to restrict boys and girls talking to each other. And I was quite surprised. I mean, we're looking at a generation which is so forward. We're talking about students who are about 21, 22, and we're still trying to make them go through something which is very different. Make them go through something which is unwanted to. So how prepared are the institutions to handle this, especially with the younger generation that we're dealing with right now? I mean, what have you seen, and what is your advice around there?
So we've gone through, like whenever there is a suicide incident, only we are called to give talks in the colleges and stuff after the act. And after the act.
That is important, yes.
Yeah, but at least, we are able to talk, and then we are able to create a rapport with the school, college management. And then we say, we will come and give free talks about how to, what kind of relationship students can have with each other, with their teachers and all. But we are a long way to go where we don't have the platform to talk to the management and the teachers, the professors, to tell them to open up to these things. By restricting the youth, by restricting them not to do they will do exactly that, and they will do it manifold.
Exactly, ma'am. Exactly. You are bang on the point. I mean, when you're restricting them, they would want to do that, and they're doing it.
Definitely. And as this opportunity which I have got, I want to talk about ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. We are finding so many, when I go to corporates for counseling, I'm finding 40-year-old adults, male, female adults having these issues and not able to work properly. Why? Because this was not treated as a kid.
All right.
And we are able to correct them. We are able to get them back on track. We are able to, with medication, with counseling, with scheduling, with all of these mindfulness activities and all that. So these things do work. But as Dr. Srilakshmi said, when they become adults, they realize that there is something wrong with them. They come for help.
Yeah.
And then they are going back now to the parents and telling that you did not do this for me. And they are wanting to do this for, but that percentage of people who want, who can, self-disclosure, who can do, they are very few.
Yeah.
Very
Going
few.
back,
Talk about these things. We need to talk
Sorry.
about ADHD. One moment. We need to talk about ADHD. We need to talk about gender issues. We need to talk. We need to talk to the students and tell them it's okay to be the way they are.
Yes. Absolutely. Yes,
just
ma'am.
going back to this thing that you were talking about, Ashoka, about institutions not letting boys and girls mix. I also feel that the issue of technology is very, very similar, where the counseling or the awareness actually is more required among the adults than the children. So while yes, there is sex education and stuff like that that happens in schools, should happen. At the same time, the older generation needs to understand that you can't change the entire world. Technology is a part of our world. For example, boys and girls working together is a part of the world that they are going to live in. And if we are going to restrict that and going to create a taboo out of it, that's not going to work for them in the future. Rather, like Dr. Jayanti was saying, that if you restrict it, they're going to just find wrong ways of interacting or hiding and interacting. And the same actually applies with technology. And I know I'm shifting the topic a little bit towards technology, is that the world today has technology. So you have to learn how to live with technology, not saying that, oh, I'm going to take away your phone, I'm going to take away your laptop, and you don't have access to it. But you have to allow your child to learn how to control it and not let the device control you. So it's a more positive approach to being able to how shall I say, exist and cope with the world they are going to go into, rather than saying, being like a ostrich with a head in the sand and say, okay, you can take away the device now. What when they go off to college? What when they start working? They will still need to learn how to control that urge to pick up the phone all the time and have that human connect. If they don't learn it now, they'll never learn it.
True, very true.
Very true. In fact, I was trying to ask, should the colleges or should the faculty be mandatorily going through a certification course? Might be a small time or a small duration course to make them aware of what is actually needed or expected out of them to learn while they're dealing with so many youngsters, because all of this young generation are going through that have been there for years, 75 years of education system, or the British era education the British era education system is what we are still going through. Should we not be going through a transformation around this and introduce a compulsory course for the faculty, a short duration course? That's my opinion. I'm just
absolutely. Not only for the faculty, I think mental wellness and identifying when the signs of distress increase should be a curriculum for the children also. And when you're doing the chapter in biology, it should include one on the mind as well, which will help them a long way in future to identify and also destigmatize. So we often forget why is it that we do not approach mental health. See, you can put counselors everywhere. You can put counselors in schools, you can put counselors in corporates, you can put counselors in colleges. People will not go there, because there is this terrible stigma.
Social
stigma that what if I go to a counselor, what will people think about me? Kya main pagal hu? This is the first question. Okay.
Yeah.
So there are so many misconceptions around the mental health field, that as though you're responsible for what you're feeling, you are the one who's a failure, who's not doing it. If I go to a counselor, or even worse than that, if you go to a psychiatrist, what will happen? Will I get a job? What if my teachers find out? What if my friends find out? Will my daughter get married if she goes to a psychiatrist? So on and so forth. Though we do not hesitate if we get a tuberculosis or a hepatitis or a typhoid, we are very happy. We'll want to go to so many people.
Yeah.
And and many doctors, and we can go shopping also to understand what is happening to us. But we do not do it in mental illness. Therefore, despite having the facilities, if the stigma remains, it is unlikely that they will even reach the help that is available.
You also, Ashoka, you touched upon a very a topic which I think I feel very strongly about. You talked about how teachers should undergo some certification to be able to identify that this child needs help or that child. I'm now in Singapore, and my son goes to a Singapore school, and I see how strict they are about the kind of teachers that they hire. And the difference is stark. And I think it's the system that we have. We don't pay our educators as well in terms of, what they anybody who's done a BA or a B.Ed is entitled to become a teacher. And especially when you're dealing with younger children, you need to have some element of pastoral care, and you need to have some element of understanding what are the signs that will tell you whether the child should be diagnosed or should be at least tested for ADHD or for depression or some other mental illness. If you don't even know what the signs are, how will you raise the alarm? And again, as Dr. Sri Lakshmi and Dr. Jayanti will know, that these symptoms don't show up they're different in different circumstances. Sometimes they show up in certain environments and not in another environment. And so yes, but that's a long haul kind of a scenario if the whole education system has to undergo that.
Things are changing. Things are
Yes.
changing.
Yes.
They are changing.
Yeah.
There are school counselors who are via media, because directly if a teacher tells a parent that your child is having this, they will quit the school. So there has to be a finesse in how you have to express these things and all. And there's a form. There are several internationally approved forms which can be given to parents to really introspect whether this problem is there, and then given a choice of so many therapists and counselors where they can go. But yet we are a long way to go, but there is this thing. And so at Roshni Counseling Center, we also do these assessments for children who are unable to read and write, and we need to send them for concessions, CBSE concessions. So in such one assessment, the child was doing very badly at math, and I had to tell the parent that she need to drop math. And the parent was like, if there is no math, what will she do in life? And I said, come back, we will talk about this.
No.
But the child needs, because if she has math, that anxiety will build up. She won't be able to do well in any other subject.
Yeah.
But thankfully now ICSE also gives you an option of not taking math in class 10. So, things are changing a little bit. People are understanding that it's not as if you don't do math in class 10, all hell will break loose.
Yes.
So if the boards are starting and they are, giving you an option that yes, you can drop a subject like math, then hopefully the change will percolate down.
Yeah. So then there will not be so much of pressure of doing engineering.
Yes, engineering. I mean, yes. You're looking at a victim here sitting in front of you, so I can understand what students are going. If this is about just understanding what should we be doing at an education level and with the institutions that the students are going to every day, then this will take another topic for the next 1 week to discuss. I mean, there's a lot that we'll have to do here, because I've been in Australia for 8 years, and I've seen what it is that happens there to what it is here, and there's a stark difference. The teachers over there are necessarily certified. They have a certificate 1, certificate 2, 3, and 4 levels of certifications, and they go through a lot of personal training and interpersonal relationship training to understand a student and be able to guide them. So there's a big difference, and they're more empowered when compared to what we are here. But said that, we're also working towards a better education system here, and I vouch for it. So if we keep continuing, I mean, this is a fantastic topic, and we've been discussing for the past 1 hour. I know we have passed our time, and we didn't even realize that. But we have got a lot of participants on the session today. And I've also asked them to put through their questions, and we'll take a few questions from them. I'll read through them on the messages so that we're not having too many people talking at the same time. And the first question that we've got is, thanks for this wonderful session. Can we consider introverts and people who aren't often socialized are also depressed?
No. Introversion is a personality trait. You can be a happy-go-lucky person. You can be a person who loves to be among people. You can be a person who loves your own company. As long as you're comfortable and you're happy with what you are, And this is a trait since you're very young, and it is now continued into adulthood, and it has not hampered your life in any way. Please go ahead and be comfortable being an introvert. Not a problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're looking at an introvert myself, and I know I'm an INFJ in the MBTI personality test, but introversion is not a problem. It's one of the big 5 personality traits, and what you know, and it's not about quantity, it's about quality. So you have a few friends whom you're good with, you have a human connection, you have somebody you can talk to. That's what an introvert needs, and that will keep you from being low, and they will be there to support you when you're feeling low or sad. And I'm, you know, particularly not using the word depressed, because we seem to use the word depressed very casually. And that is why I think today Dr. Sri Lakshmi is having to make the difference between depression and clinical depression, because, you know, we use the word depression so casually.
Very
So, but yes.
depression, very paranoid. All of these are used like, you know, there is no doubt, there is no sadness, there is no fear. It's all anxiety, depression, and paranoid.
Yeah. So if you're an introvert, or if you know somebody who's an introvert, you know, that you just accept yourself as somebody who does not like to go party and do hoo-ha halla. You're okay with a few friends, and that should be perfectly fine to keep your depression at bay.
Yay, that's a good high five for all the introverts out there. I mean, yes, that's not a clinical depression as such, and you're all fine. And the next question, I become sometimes sensitive, like when issues like recently Sushant or previously Sridevi, these issues happen. Like, I mean, I feel really very bad for a few days. Presently, I'm all right, but then these type of issues happen. I become very low for 4 to 5 days. I want to change this. Can you help me out, ma'am? Yeah, I mean, even we are depressed when we have lost such a beautiful souls, and it's a normal phenomenon. I mean, even at least I'm thinking that it's pretty normal with all of us. You shouldn't be worried about you becoming.
Me and Sri Lakshmi will be sad even if a dog dies. If our dog dies, we are sad. If a cat dies, we are sad. We are sad because we are humans. We have emotions. We feel bad, like for a life cut short like this. Why there was nobody to help them? Will this happen to me when I'm feeling low? Nobody is there to talk to me. So we are there to talk to you. Even if you feel sad and you're continuously feeling sad, do reach out, talk. I know, write mails. We are there to help you. There is no need for you to sit and think alone about these things.
Yes.
That's why we have that talk.
Sitting and thinking alone and for a longer period of time is definitely going to be a problem. That is what you may need to avoid.
I also want to, you know, mention one small thing over here, which is that feeling sad there's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly.
There's something tragic. There's something tragic that has happened, and please, you know, feel it, own the feeling. And they say that, you know, having emotional diversity is actually an indication of happiness. Somebody who can be happy because you experience different emotions. So there is, you know, it's not as if feeling sad or feeling unhappy is something bad. It happens to everybody, and yes, that is part of the emotional set that humans have. And feeling upset about something that is a bit of a tragedy, that is a tragedy that has happened, is only natural. However, also think about some lessons that you can learn from this. And, you know, this is what I was talking to somebody today, that the one biggest lesson that I've learned from this tragedy that has happened with SSR is that money, success, the way the society decides it, fame, popularity, these are not contributions to happiness or peace of mind. You know, define your own success. And for that, you need to find out what you want to define your success as. And don't look at outside for those answers. What other people say, you know, will never end. By the way, money will never end. It's like a hamster wheel that you'll keep running in.
And there is one more thing which pushes people to suicide is rejection. Feeling of being rejected by others. Who are others to reject you? You are there for yourself to pull yourself up and say that I will not be rejected by myself.
Yeah, thank you. And the next question is how to control someone who's turning too aggressive in this COVID period and have to change their mindset to be positive? Interesting question.
Too aggression is a problem. Aggression is not normal. Okay. So when you're occasionally aggressive to make a point, it's different. Now you have to understand what is anger and what is aggression. So when for example, if you are you wanting to make a point, and you supposing there's a child who's wanting to tell the mother, like I've read through the questions, and one of them said, how do we express our feelings to our parents? So I'll club both the answers. So when you're wanting to make a point to your parents, there are two ways to do it. Either you explain it to them, catch them in a mood when they're wanting to listen, as compared to yelling and shouting and breaking things to make a point. Now when you're that aggressive physically or verbally, the focus is on the aggression and never on the problem. So you lose. You from the beginning, you've already lost the scene, and they will not. They will brand you as somebody very aggressive. So that is aggression is of no use, is what I want to point out here. Second is excessive aggression, continuous aggression. If it is a sudden onset thing, like the child has always been calm and now has suddenly started aggression during the lockdown period, you might be looking at a mental illness. If the child has always been aggressive and this has now aggravated during these stressful periods, then definitely the child needs help. Help can come as can start off with therapy to understand why the aggression is aggravated and all that. But sometimes aggression, like every other emotion, is a biological thing. So if there is an impulsive anger, like they're sudden to anger and then there's sudden regret, why did I do this? Okay, this is called impulsivity. That can be treated medically. So you have to understand that unnecessary aggression has no point, and if it is too much and affecting your functionality, it requires treatment.
Great, thank you. And a very interesting question. Why parents keep restrictions, and why should we not talk to a boy? As if our parents did not do it in their young age. But then we have gone through many things. We know what to do. We know what is right to do. So that's, I'm not sure if it is a statement or a question, but yes, that's been put up on the comments. And
that's one angry girl.
Oh, angry girl. Parents are very afraid nowadays. They are very afraid. They are not, it's not that they doubt their children, they doubt the world as such. And they fear that there are very bad people outside where that their daughters might go through some difficulties and all. The way they express it may not be right, but their concern is genuine. Because, and also there is this flaw between this parent-child relationship where the child is unable to express and the parent is unable to understand. So if the child gives a confidence to the parents that, yes, I'm able to handle these things, you need to let me to take risks. And I also want to tell parents that unless and until their children take risks, how are they ever going to learn? How long are they going to protect their children? Equip them with judo, karate, pepper spray, all that. Let them live in the world, let them make their mistakes and, come out the winner, come out the victor in that. That is how they will grow in life. So I think that's what will be my answer to this girl.
Thank you. And I've got a private question. I think that PTSD can not only be physical, but also mentally triggered. How to deal with PTSD when you have all other conventional things to do? You can't just take a day off. You can't just skip exams. How to tackle that and effectively try to overcome PTSD, which is constantly making you distressed?
PTSD, let me define, is a post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm not very sure whether your person who's written to you actually understands what they're talking about. Post-traumatic stress disorder results when the trauma is life-threatening. That means they have had a very near-death experience, fatal accident, somebody very close has died and they were also one of the victims there, have been a victim of a rape attack or have witnessed somebody very closely that. So they can be that threatening, where it threatens your life and your integrity, then it becomes PTSD. Now, PTSD is a very complicated illness, and it requires hands-on treatment, because PTSD can be very disabling in terms of sleep, in terms of appetite, in terms of emotions, in terms of reactions, in terms of thoughts, and so many things. And all these need to be controlled with medication, and definitely therapy is a very, very major part of treatment. And yes, no matter this, I want to add this also. I like to focus on the last part of the question. Most people with mental illness are very successful people also in this world. You won't know because they don't talk about it. Okay, I have in my own group of clients and patients who come to me. I have bankers, I have actors, I have doctors, I have engineers who are all having some sort of mental health issue, taking treatment, and then going about their lives very normally. So both can be done.
Thank you. How important it is to understand that the person is actually not in depression and is in a temporary phase of sadness, or that a person is not going through because of regular routines, and stop overthinking of regular routines. So the question says how important it is to understand that the person is actually not in depression and is in a temporary phase of sadness.
Yes, very important, isn't it? It's as good as saying, how will I know whether I have malaria or not, or whether I have tuberculosis or not? You have to know that you're clinically depressed. There is no way out but to understand. I think they could just go back, rewind this recording later and see how we have differentiated the two. We've already answered this question.
Yeah.
But is it essential to know whether you're depressed? Yes, absolutely it is essential to know, because it's very disabling. You will not be able to understand why you're not able to move your body, why your mind is not concentrating, why you're not able to laugh at all. And why is it that you're thinking of suicide and various forms of suicide? You're thinking of various ways in which I can commit suicide. This is not normal. This is not normal at all.
And this also leads to another question, which says, how do you know the depression is clinical? When do you prescribe we need medication to cope up with?
Exactly, like I said, if they rewind the recording, they'll
Depression is
clinical.
Yeah.
How do you know depression is clinical?
Yeah. Dr. Sri Lakshmi had defined clinical depression in the beginning. So, yeah.
Yeah, one interesting question, and this probably is put up by a faculty. Some students continue to disagree with faculty, or what they have to do, always try to escape. How do we can counsel them? I mean, disagreement is not an illness per se.
it's a behavior.
Yes,
Basically,
but it's
what
not-
happens with student-professor relationship is, whenever you are seeing that the student is disagreeing with you, you need not take it personally. The faculty need not take it personally, thinking that ये मेरे को ही बोल रहा है, मेरे को disrespect कर रहा है, ऐसे नहीं है. It is a student who is in a rebellious mood, who is trying to evade, or so you need to keep your firmness, you need to keep your tolerance, you need to keep a smile on your face and tell them, no boss, you need to do this. I'm not getting affected by what you're saying. I don't get affected by whatever you're saying or whatever expressions you are showing. I want you to do this. Now you can grumble and do it, or you can laugh and do it. It's up to you.
Also, I think it's very important to understand what age group of children you are dealing with when you're talking about this. So if you're talking about kids who are 18 and 17, 18, 19, we have to understand they're almost adults, right? So there has to be a system of finding common ground and finding a way to communicate with them. If you're going to be somebody who's going to talk down on them, those days are gone. You can't just tell them do this and I'm your professor and that's the end of the story. You can use an autocratic approach. They'll get even more rebellious. You try and find common ground, and I'm sure that you can work out something.
They might disagree with the fact that they're almost adults. They'll say they're adults already. I mean, yes, they would want to.
They have to be weaned into that, right? Yeah. You can't suddenly say, here is a protective environment, you are the bacha, everything is fine, and then suddenly hands off, now you are an adult. So, when you're almost an adult, then you have to wean them into that kind of an environment that they have to deal with later.
Sure, there's an interesting question. How can we share our feelings with parents? My parents are keeping more instructions and treat me like a small child. How can I share my feelings? I'll get a lot of fear while I'm saying something.
Age?
They won't say probably.
Don't know how old.
But old enough to write so clearly. So
18, 19.
The first thing also is to, what responsibility are you showcasing? You say that they don't understand you and they're treating you like children. Let's start with what you can do and what you control, right? So you can control a few things. Can you start with demonstrating to them that you are growing into a responsible person? Are you doing the things that you are doing? So with certain rights come certain responsibilities, right? What are the responsibilities that you are showing them? And maybe once you've kind of established that, then approach the talk and talk to them and tell them that, no, I'm doing my bit. So can we have a conversation? Communication is very, very important. If you want to be at a plane with your parents and they're telling you what to do, start with doing your bit and then maybe communicate with them. So given what I know right now, this is what I can.
I think she's saying that she's afraid of expressing her feelings to her parents. There is a fear. So what she needs to do is she needs to tell this to the parents, that I'm afraid of talking to you, because parents are also afraid where if they say something or they allow her to do something bad will happen. So she needs to express to the parents that I want to talk to you people. You are the only people in my life who can help me with this, and I'm afraid to speak to you. And I'm sure they will understand. They understand. It is like this. We are afraid of something. Like there are people who are afraid of lizards, lizards are afraid of you. So it goes both the ways. Parents are also afraid what we will say, the child will take it in the wrong way. So what should we do? Let us not take any risk. Let's control the kid. So
Yeah.
also, yeah.
When it is a matter of fear, the one thing that I would say is that you will never know unless you try it, number one.
Absolutely.
And second, you don't have to go whole hog in one go. Take tiny steps. So if there is something that you need to communicate to them that you feel is a big thing that you want to talk to them about, start with, some other small things and see how the reaction is. And I'm sure you will know and you will understand that your parents are wanting to listen to you.
I really don't understand one thing, that why do we remember bad memories for a longer period than happy moments? I mean, we don't cherish happy moments so many times like we remember the bad things happening and it's impacting us. Yeah, that's a question.
Bad memories tend to have strong memory traces because a lot of severe emotions are attached to them. There are a lot of emotions attached to it. So as a result, we tend to store it. People who continuously, recollect past things, think about the bad things that happened to them, they ruminate more, are also likely that they're more susceptible to depression. So you have to understand that maybe there is a foundation of worrying about things that they have not, not done, or worrying about the bad things that have happened to them, worrying about all the negative things that have happened to them. You keep thinking and thinking and thinking about them. There possibly you have an underlying foundation where you may get into depression. Not everybody, somebody can, some of them can.
Probably this might be our last question for the day. Is difficulty in going to sleep a disorder too, on daily basis, not once in a while?
Yes, it is diagnosed. Insomnia is a diagnosed disorder. So quickly, some sleep hygiene tips of 2-3. I think the rest of the panelists also will be doing it on a daily basis. If you're not able to sleep, you have to ask yourself why. There are a lot of triggers in your environment why you're not able to sleep. Let's start with that. Let's think of medical conditions later. If you are a chai drinker and you drink tea, coffee after 6-7 o'clock in the evening, or you drink a cup of tea after you have your dinner, it is an activating drug, right? The chemicals in the tea will activate your brain and you will not be able to sleep. Similarly, if you have a television in your room, or if you have a phone in your hand and you want to WhatsApp late into the night and then you expect to sleep, you're not going to sleep. Similarly, if you are not having difficulty sleeping and you have a phone beside your bed, or you have a clock on the wall, and you wake up every 1 hour and say, "Acha, I have not slept till now. 2 baj gaya, 3 baj gaya, I have not slept till now." You're further activating your brain and you will not be able to sleep. If you are, if you have had no time to relax, you just came home, rushed, had your food, and kept doing your work on the laptop, and then suddenly you switch on the laptop and you expect to sleep, it is not going to happen. Good sleep hygiene means you fix your timing, especially at the time in which you wake up. Most people confuse it with the right time you go to sleep. Fix the time you wake up. If you're waking up at 6 o'clock, wake up at 6 o'clock. That way what happens is your sleep cycle gets fixed. If today you're waking up at 6, tomorrow you're waking up at 10 in the morning, and then at next day 12, so sleep to yahin pe khatam ho gaya na. And you're a human being, no? You will only need, and not Kumbhakaran, you will only need 6 to 7 hours of sleep in a day. So if you're sleeping at 6-7 hours in the morning, why will you sleep at the night? So fix your time, going to bed, waking up in the morning. Have a fixed routine. Do not exercise too much just before bed. Do not jog your memory too much with horror movies or loud music or a lot of gadgets just before sleeping. Switch everything off by 10 o'clock and then go to bed peacefully. Within half an hour, you should be able to go to sleep. If all this is not helping and you're having a lot of difficulty sleeping, so much so that you're very drowsy during the daytime, you take naps while you're working and you're not able to control, you have accidents when you're driving because you're feeling so drowsy, that's the time then you require medical help also.
I myself have seen 2 close family members who have actually gone through this. I mean, one of my close family members had been studying throughout the night during her graduation times. She used to be awake until 4 in the morning and then have difficulty in having a daily routine thereafter. And after she has completed her engineering, while she is about to get into a corporate world, she had to go through a lot of adjustmental issue in trying to come to terms with the new routine that she'll have to adhere to. So it is important for us to, yes, say that we are working through the night, but it is also important for us to say that that is not a norm that we got to use to. We'll have to be careful about our sleeping habits. That is very true. In fact, sorry to say this to you, ma'am, we cannot end the question sessions, at least for the next 5 minutes, because they are very interesting questions. So let them let us answer them. It says, girls have some ideas to help the society, but parents never give permission. They keep restricting us. I mean, you've got three eminent personalities here, three women who have excelled in their areas. And do you think they wouldn't have gone through the same thing in their life? I mean, yes, it is a sad truth in our society that the girls will have to go through this. But let us listen from all three on this particular thing.
I think, Sri Lakshmi, you should tell what happened when you were planning to do psychiatry.
And this is the tip. You cannot get worse than this. When I was already married when I had to do my MD in psychiatry. So my parents are very liberal. I wouldn't have been here if my parents were not very supportive. Though my liberty and my freedom had restrictions. I had to come back. I had to show responsibility to get freedom. It went hand in hand. Rules and regulations came along with any kind of liberty I was given. There was never that I take all rights and I do not do my duty. This doesn't happen, and it should not happen in any household also. So when I was about to get married, when I was about to get my MD counseling, my father-in-law calls up my husband and says, no, don't ask her to take psychiatry. All her children will be born mad. So this is the kind of stigma I had against this fellow. This poor fellow had to manage and tell him that no, all the seats are over, only psychiatry is left, and so many stories he told him. Thankfully, he was not a doctor, so that helped my father-in-law. So incidentally, the kind of freedom that, let's say, my husband was able to stand by me so strongly. So also that part also let's not neglect. Incidentally, my 15-year-old wants to be a food critic. Son of two doctors, doesn't want to be an engineer, doesn't want to be a engineer or a doctor. I'm specifically saying this. The world is out for the children to choose from, and it is for the parents to give them that freedom. We may not have got so much freedom in our childhood because of our circumstances. It is our duty to give them the right to choose. But with the rights come responsibilities also. They go hand in hand.
Thank you.
So,
yeah.
I was a very bad student till my 12th grade. I was like failing all the time, and I didn't know why I was failing. Neither my teachers knew, my parents didn't know. And then ultimately I thought I need to do something very drastic, and I took things in my hands and I enrolled for psychology. So everybody said she'll not get married. Everybody said that if she at least, does a BCom, she'll get the job of a secretary, or a steno or something. Why is she doing psychology? It was not easy, but I found myself in doing psychology, in doing my master's, in counseling people. Every day I talk to a child or a client, I find myself more.
Yeah.
It's not easy. Small example is like recently when the COVID started, I got a very big hate message from an unknown client saying that you said I have an OCD. Now OCD is a norm. So these things we have to face. Girls, you need to put your foot down. You need to show your parents that you're serious about what you want to do. You cannot fool around where your life is, right? You cannot say, I want to do this and go and do something else. You need to prove every day. Proving by action is the only way. Standing on top of Mount Everest and saying I've changed is not going to make anybody believe. You need to stay on the path. You need to have the staying power. Then you will achieve things in life.
Fantastic. I mean, let's also hear from Shivani, ma'am, and then we'll...
Well, I personally never had to really convince anybody to do something, because I've always been somebody who kind of knew what I wanted to do, had a spine, and went ahead with it. And I really want to send this message out to not just girls, all the kids out there, all the college going students, that guys, you're not a 2-year-old kid. Nobody can lift you up and put you somewhere, right? So if you have the conviction that this is what you want to do, you can choose measures of communication. You can try and talk to them. You can decide your own path ahead without choosing negative approaches like aggression or running away or something like that. And at the end of the day, if you say that this is what I want to do, then you will be able to convince them. It's just like saying that I'm not going to give up. So what if you had no choice? What if you, I have a podcast on Ikigai on the Unify platform, where I've talked about how you can go about, finding out what you really want to do. And then there is another one where I've talked about how you can talk to your parents. So these are things that you can do. You're not a 4-year-old kid. Nobody can just lift you up and put you in a mandap saying you're going to get married. So stand your ground. But like the doctor said, do it responsibly. Don't, if you start taking negative action, then you're not being responsible. And then nobody will look at you as an adult or will consider what you are saying. If you're responsible, they will take you seriously.
Now, it is also about the rest of the family as well as their close ones being responsible towards your careers and being able to be cognizant about the fact that you are achievers, not just people who are going to follow someone. So
yes, but here, Ashoka, I would like to say that unfortunately, that is what seems to be causing an impression on other people, on the youth's mind today. So why is engineering, lots of kids themselves choose engineering, and maybe here I can share my story where I went ahead and did my MBA, and I knew I had a love for psychology and the human brain. I did not follow through that because MBA at that point of time seemed like a more practical option to be financially independent. And so it was my choice, but it was a choice I made because of the fact that I thought it's a more practical option. I want to be financially independent. I did not follow, where my passion lay.
Right.
And look at where I am today. I'm in a life 2.0, and finally the wisdom has happened, and I've gone ahead and done courses on positive psychology and stuff like that. Self-taught myself. Now doing an MA in counseling from a university in Australia and stuff like that. So yes, rather than knowing 20 years down the line that I didn't do what I really wanted to and got influenced by other people, go ahead and talk to career counselors, talk to somebody who can help you open your world and explore what you really want to do. And the world is your stage, guys.
Thank you so much for all three panel members for such a wonderful discussion. I mean, we have planned this for only 60 minutes. I'm feeling really apologetic for stealing your time from you today, but we really couldn't stop beyond a point because this is the need of the hour. This is what the students, the young generation that makes up our country from here on are going through. And we would want to bring this to them. We are starting this series with this fantastic panel discussion today. Starting from tomorrow, there will be one panel member who will be, or one counselor or a psychiatrist or a psychologist who's present on this discussion, who will be able to answer questions. And we have an email ID that we have sent out. It's lets.talk@unify.com. And we'll be taking questions from you. We'll be preparing those questions beforehand, and we'll be reading them anonymously to the guest on the show, and we'll answer your questions. So this is an indefinite show. It will go on forever until we can do it with our might and effort, and we would want to make a difference to all of you youngsters. So stay tuned, stay positive, and stay connected. Let's talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashoka.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure being with you here. Thank you.